Imagine standing in front of 300 guests at your own engagement party and watching the man you're about to marry slow dance with his ex while everyone stares at you. The whispers cut deeper than the music, but what he didn't know was this. By midnight, I wouldn't be the humiliated bride he thought I was. I'd be the woman holding the ring, the mansion, and a plan that would ruin him forever. This isn't just a love story gone wrong, it's the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Stay with me because every second of what happened next will leave you breathless. I never thought the sound of champagne glasses clinking could feel like the soundtrack to my own undoing. If you've ever believed in fairy tales, if you've ever thought the universe was finally giving you the love you deserved, then you'll understand why I ignored every whisper of doubt, every uneasy pause in his voice, every quiet look from people who seemed to know something I didn't. My name is Selena, and 2 years ago I thought I had it all. I wasn't some fragile damsel waiting to be rescued. I was 29. A black woman who had carved her way up from the streets of Birmingham to become a celebrated architect in London. I had my own firm, a small team that I nurtured like family, and projects that put my name in magazines I'd once only flipped through in waiting rooms. I had independence, money, respect, the kind of life that my grandmother used to tell me was waiting if I believed in hard work and grace. And then came Ethan. I met him at a charity art auction along the Thames, the kind of event I rarely had time for, but one of my clients insisted I attend. The room was filled with people who spoke in low, polished tones, men in tailored suits that looked hand-stitched to their skin, women in gowns that floated like liquid. I'd worn a crimson dress that evening, bold against my skin, not because I wanted to stand out, but because red had always been my color of confidence. And that's when he noticed me. Ethan was the kind of man who carried his power like it was second nature. Tall, broad-shouldered. His presence drew attention without him saying a word. He leaned against the bar with a glass of whiskey, scanning the room like it already belonged to him, and in many ways it did. His family had old money tied to technology investments and oil ventures in the Middle East, and his own ventures had pushed his worth past the billion mark before he turned 40. But that night, all of that was background noise to me, because when his eyes landed on mine, it was as though the entire auction faded away. He approached with a smile that was almost disarming. "That painting you're eyeing," he said, his voice low, smooth. "You're either about to outbid half this room, or you're pretending to care while thinking about something else entirely." I laughed, startled at his accuracy, and admitted both were true. That was the start of what I thought would be my forever. He wasn't just wealthy. He was attentive in ways I'd never known. He remembered the names of my colleagues. He sent my assistant flowers on her birthday. He asked about my grandmother's arthritis after meeting her once. It was those details, not the jets to Capri or the nights in Paris, that hooked me. For 18 months, Ethan made me feel like the center of his universe. He'd call me during board meetings just to hear my laugh. He whisked me away on private weekends when my deadlines threatened to swallow me whole. He walked into every room like it was his, but always made me feel like I was the only one in it who mattered. I wasn't just his partner, I felt like his equal. And when he dropped to one knee on a balcony overlooking Hyde Park with a diamond ring that caught the moonlight like it had been carved from the stars themselves, I said yes with a trembling smile and tears blurring the city lights. The ring, he explained, had belonged to his mother. A family heirloom. A symbol of the legacy he wanted to share with me. £500,000 sitting on my finger. But to me it wasn't the price, it was the history, the promise that I was becoming part of something lasting. I believed him. I believed us. After that, everything shifted. I let go of my apartment, told my staff I'd be taking a step back, and moved into his Surrey estate, a sprawling mansion with gardens that stretched into the horizon. My friends congratulated me, some with envy, others with genuine joy, but a few looked at me with questions they didn't voice. Questions I brushed aside because when you think you finally found the man who sees all of you, you don't want to listen to shadows. Still, there was always one name that lingered like perfume in a room long after someone has left. Claudia. His ex. They had been together nearly a decade, on and off, before me. According to Ethan, they parted ways on good terms. "We grew apart, Selena," he would say casually whenever her name surfaced. "She was important but not forever. You're my forever." And I believed that too. I told myself it was maturity to keep an ex in your circle, proof of his kindness rather than a red flag. Looking back now, I want to shake that woman I was and tell her to trust the knot in her stomach. 6 months later, our engagement party loomed, the event of the season, Ethan said. Over 300 guests invited to celebrate our future. A carefully curated list of London's elite. He took charge of the final guest list himself, assuring me he knew who needed to be there. "Trust me, love," he whispered one night as he brushed my hair off my shoulder. "This isn't just about us, it's about setting the foundation for the world we'll build together." His words melted me, as they always did, but in hindsight I realized those foundations were already cracking. The morning of the party, I woke feeling like royalty. My gown was custom, ivory silk with gold embroidery that glimmered when I moved. My skin glowed under the careful hands of the makeup artist, and my curls were pinned in a way that showed off the diamond studs he'd given me weeks before. I looked in the mirror and saw not just a bride-to-be but a woman who had fought her way into the kind of life people wrote about in magazines. For a few precious hours, I let myself believe that this was my happy ending. That every sacrifice, every late night in the office, every heartbreak before Ethan had led me to this moment. But happiness has a way of slipping through your fingers, just when you think you've got a grip on it. That morning, Ethan was restless, phone glued to his ear, stepping into hallways when I walked into rooms. When I asked, he kissed my forehead and murmured, "Just business, my love. Nothing for you to worry about." I wanted to trust him, but unease gnawed at me. Later, while my stylist pinned the last strands of my hair, I overheard two members of the catering staff whispering, "Make sure the vegan options are plated perfectly," one said. Mr. Ethan was insistent, especially for Miss Claudia. The name landed like ice in my veins. Claudia. Why would Ethan be thinking about her diet at our engagement party? Why was she even on the list? I asked him, my voice trembling but soft, and he gave me that same calm smile, the one that had always disarmed me. "She's just an old friend, Selena. I didn't think you'd mind. You're secure enough in us, aren't you?" The question wasn't really a question, it was a challenge, a reminder that if I objected, I'd look insecure. So I swallowed my fear, pushed down the jealousy that clawed at me, and told myself this was just noise. Tonight was about us. About me. About the life I was stepping into. I should have listened to the voice inside me that whispered something was terribly wrong. Because that night, as the chandeliers lit up the ballroom and the guests poured in, I would learn that love without respect is just a performance, and I was standing center stage in a play I hadn't agreed to star in. By the time the first black car pulled through the gates, I had talked myself back into the dream. The quartet tuned softly in the corner. The chandeliers glowed like captured constellations, and waiters traced glittering paths with trays of oysters and champagne. I told myself that jitters were normal, that every bride-to-be has a moment where nerves masquerade as doubt. I looked down at my hand, steady, ring catching the light, then up at the mirrored walls that made the ballroom look infinite. If a room could promise a future, this one was swearing vows on our behalf. Ethan appeared at my elbow with a smile that kissed without touching. "You look extraordinary," he said, voice low enough to sound intimate, public enough to be safe. He didn't hug me. He adjusted my earring as though perfecting a detail on a painting he owned. "Ready," he added, already scanning past me to the doorway where a new wave of guests spilled in. I told him I was. I told myself I was. It's astonishing how easily a woman can confuse composure with peace. People I barely knew greeted me like an old friend. A venture capitalist introduced his wife and her mother, who squeezed my hands and said I had the glow of a woman stepping into destiny. A fashion editor told me the embroidery on my gown looked like gold filigree poured over silk. A neighbor from the estate's edge said she'd never seen the gardens look more magnificent, and that it was obvious my touch had refined everything. Each compliment should have buoyed me, but their words slid through me like a breeze through lace. Because love is not a stage set, and a beautiful scene cannot quiet a heart that senses it's being rehearsed for the wrong play. Ethan moved like a conductor among the guests. Where he stood, conversations bent around him. Where he laughed, people laughed louder. Sometimes he would glance over at me and give a nod, as if we shared a secret. Sometimes he would put a hand on my back as he passed, a brush that felt like ownership and reassurance braided into one. I kept thinking about the caterer's whisper. "Vegan plates for Miss Claudia." I tasted her name in the back of my throat, the way people taste rain when a storm is turning. I didn't want to ask again and be told I was insecure. So I carried my question in my spine and let it make me taller instead of smaller. The first toast came early, from a family friend who had known Ethan since prep school. He spoke about loyalty and legacy, about men who build and women strong enough to stand beside them. He called me a rare combination of grace and grit. The room applauded and I smiled on cue, but the word legacy rang in my chest like a bell only I could hear. My grandmother had a different word for it. Inheritance not of money, but of character. She used to say, "Baby, you inherit a person's habits, not just their house, if you bind yourself to them." I could see her in my mind, sitting on her back steps, rubbing ointment into her knees, telling me that love without respect is a slow starvation. I blinked, and the vision dissolved into crystal and laughter. Around 9, the band shifted from polite melodies to songs that coaxed the room onto its feet. The staff flowed like a choreographed tide, refilling glasses, straightening cutlery, replacing empty platters with new ones so quickly it felt like magic. I caught the eye of the head planner, a meticulous woman named Ava whose clipboard was an extension of her arm. She mouthed perfect with a thumbs up, and I felt a bloom of pride. If nothing else, the night was immaculate. The garden doors were open to let in the evening air. Lanterns glowed along the hedges, and a soft wind threaded jasmine through the hall. I stepped toward the open doors for a breath, and that's when the energy shifted. It wasn't visible at first, just a hush that gathers the way a room quiets before a speech. A valet's voice carried from the corridor. "Welcome, Mississippi." There was a pause, the kind people fill with their own projections. Then heels clicked on marble, calm and unhurried. Guests turned reflexive like sunflowers. I turned too. She entered with the kind of timing you don't buy, you rehearse. Tall, litheness folded into poise. Hair swept back like a surfer's wave held in place by something expensive. The dress was white. Not cream or ivory or dove white. The audacity of a snowfield in spring. And in that instant, though I had never seen her in person, I knew. The air around Ethan sharpened, as if his profile had been sketched in ink. His mouth lifted into a smile I had not seen since the week he proposed. A smile that belonged to a different part of his life. A different script, a different woman. "Selena," he said, almost breathless, already walking. "Be right back." No explanation, no invitation to join him, just the certainty of a man returning to a room he recognizes better than the one he is in. He crossed the space quickly but not hurriedly, like a man who knows he will not be denied. The guests how they love a story that confirms their suspicions. I heard the ripples begin behind hands and into glasses. "Isn't that Dash? She looks incredible. I thought she was in Geneva. Didn't they nearly dash? Do you think Dash?" None of it was loud. Gossip in rooms like this never is. It is more insidious than sound. It breathes. He reached her. The hug wasn't indecent. Indecency would have been easier to call out. It was polite enough to pass as courtesy and intimate enough to feel like a confession. A linger at the shoulder, a press at the back. The way two people who know each other's winters reassure each other of springs. Claudia there, I named her, even if no one else had yet tilted her head my way at one point. The glint of awareness in her eye like sunlight on a knife. She smiled a perfect, gentle, unassailable smile, and then turned fully back to Ethan as if the orbit had corrected itself. I stood very still and wondered if stillness was a kind of armor. Nearby, a woman in emerald leaned to her partner and whispered something. He shrugged with a face that pretended neutrality and failed. Ethan brought her over after what must have been minutes but felt like a season. "Selena," he said, hand at the small of my back as though introducing two colleagues. "This is Claudia. We go back far too long. I wanted you two to meet properly." Properly. As if what we were doing was civilized. As if names and a handshake could scrub the insult clean. I offered my hand and felt the unmistakable softness of a person whose life had never demanded she lift anything heavy without help. "Congratulations," she said. Her voice was warm, touched with something continental I couldn't place. "You look breathtaking. And this party? It's quite a triumph." There was nothing to object to in the words. The harm lived underneath in the proud stillness of her posture, the confidence of a woman who believes she holds a card the table hasn't seen yet. "Thank you for coming," I replied. My voice didn't shake. Sometimes kindness is the last territory you hold, and you defend it out of principle, not hope. Dinner was announced, and the room reorganized into assigned places. My seat Cartselina Kingsley sat beside Ethan's at the center table. Claudia's was 2 tables away, close enough to be seen, far enough to be denied. It was a compromise that satisfied no one and revealed everything. Courses appeared and vanished with mechanical grace. People praised the halibut, debated the merits of a new gallery show in Mayfair, murmured about a regulation that might shift overseas holdings by autumn. I smiled, nodded, contributed when necessary, and kept falling into the quiet between fork and plate where my mind replayed the caterer's instructions. Special attention to vegan plates for Miss Claudia. When the vegan course arrived at her table, it looked like art. Of course it did. Midway through the mains, Ethan stood to speak. Glasses chimed into a sparkle of silence, and faces turned like camera lenses refocusing. He began as men like him do, with polished gratitude and practiced affection. He thanked the guests for honoring us, he thanked his parents for their example, he thanked the staff for their excellence. He turned to me and spoke of ambition, of how he admired the way I built a life from grit and talent. It was good, the kind of good that reads well in the press. And then, like a man forgetful of his body's tells, his gaze drifted 1 seat past where it should have rested. Only for a second, but a second is enough when you're measuring a heart. He said something about the people who had shaped him into who he was, and the room, as rooms do, took the cue without needing explicit instruction. A few eyes followed his, then a few more. I felt my skin heat despite the cool room, a flush that started at my collar and moved with the humiliating insistence of a tide. When he sat, I clapped exactly as long as everyone else. He squeezed my knee under the table, a gesture that would have once melted me. Felt like being patted for good behavior. The band moved back into music, the staff cleared plates. Someone to my left told a story about skiing in Zermatt that I will never remember. I excused myself to the terrace with the plausible lie of needing air. The night outside was a velvet pocket, and the sky held its breath with me. From here, I could see reflections in the glass, the party moving like a ballet, my own figure framed by lantern light. I thought of my younger self drafting floor plans on tracing paper, the way I used to draw long corridors that turn and narrow before opening into light. It had always been my favorite device. Make the journey purposeful, then reveal the room that makes people exhale. Standing there, I realized I had drawn myself into a corridor and called it love. "Are you all right, darling?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Harcourt, an older woman I'd met twice. Her bracelets chimed as she joined me. She smelled like lilies and remembered summers. "You look luminous," she said, then dropped her voice. "And strong. Don't forget that." It was such an odd thing to say that I almost laughed. Instead, my eyes stung. "I'm fine," I replied, the way women say fine when they are holding a wall with both hands. She nodded as if she had been here before, in other dresses, in other lives. "The first duty of a room like this," she said, nodding toward the ballroom, "is to distract you from what is happening. Don't let it." Then she patted my arm and was gone, swept back into the current as if she had never eddied beside me. I returned to find the band easing into something slow and expensive, a song that sounds like polished wood in private schools. Couples arranged themselves into configurations history would approve of. Ethan found me with a smile that reached his eyes, and for a moment I was disarmed again by how handsome he was, how familiar his shoulder felt beneath my hand. He guided me to the center as if we were the axis around which the room should turn. We moved well together. He had always been a good dancer, and I had always known how to follow without disappearing. "You're perfect," he murmured as we turned. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to live my whole life in the length of that song, to stitch myself into its measures and refuse to be unpicked. But songs end. They always do. And as the last notes thinned into applause, Ethan pressed a kiss to my temple and stepped back with the careful grace of a man changing scenes rather than choices. "1 minute," he said, out loud, with a smile that invited witnesses to approve. He turned, and I watched as he walked toward the table 2 over, where white satin caught the light like the blade of a knife. Claudia rose before he reached her. The band, obedient to a cue only they seemed to hear, softened into another slow, luxurious melody. Around us, people sensed the shift and made space the way a sea makes space for a ship that believes it is entitled to the horizon. I stood very still, hands folded at my waist, the ring heavy and cold, The room suddenly too bright. Someone behind me murmured, "Bold," with admiration that felt like a slap. Another voice said, "History," like a justification, like a blessing. I didn't turn to identify them. I didn't need faces for words I had already expected to hear. I watched my fiancé extend his hand. I watched the ex take it. Their fingers met with the kind of certainty you reserve for familiar doors and the story you tell yourself about home. And as they stepped into the opening bars, his palm at her back, her smile tilted toward his shoulder, I felt something inside me stop begging to be chosen. The sound that followed was not the quartet, not the chatter, not the clink of glasses or the rustle of silk. It was the clean, sharp closing of a heart's door when a woman realizes she is done being polite with her own boundaries. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I breathed. I smoothed my dress. And then I turned toward the corridor, where the powder room waited with its quiet lights and closed doors, and walked in a straight line because dignity too is choreography. Behind me, the room leaned in to watch what it believed was romance reclaiming its rightful stage. Ahead of me, somewhere I could not yet see, was the room I would open by my own design, the one where I would stop asking to be treated gently and start insisting on being treated justly. The powder room was silent except for the faint hum of the music drifting through the closed doors. I locked myself inside a stall and sat down, hands pressed to my knees to steady the trembling I couldn't control. My reflection in the mirror earlier had been regal, radiant, a woman stepping into her destiny. Now my reflection in the glossy black shoes I stared at looked like a shadow of that queen. I thought of all the guests out there sipping champagne and whispering into each other's ears. My name was already being carried around the room like a tray of hors d'oeuvre, polite, then sharp, then heavy. I tried to swallow down the humiliation, but humiliation doesn't swallow. It lodges in the throat until it finds another way out. That's when I heard it, her voice. "Claudia." The door creaked, and the click of her heels echoed against the marble. She wasn't alone though, she was on the phone, her voice soft and confident, as if she had no reason to guard her words. "Don't worry," she said, a little laugh in her tone that stung like salt in a wound. "He's going to end it tonight. This party is his last way of making her feel like she matters before he breaks it off. It's sweet in its own way. By midnight she'll be gone, and I'll have him back where he belongs." I froze, every nerve in my body straining to hear more. I wanted to burst out and scream at her, but something told me to stay still. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I pressed my hand to my mouth, as if I could keep myself from shattering too loudly. She paused to listen to whoever was on the other end, then continued with the words that turned my blood cold. "Yes, of course, I'm sure. I'm pregnant. 6 months along. He's known for weeks. He wants to raise this child with me. He says I've always been his true family." The words came like blows, each one harder than the last. Pregnant. 6 months. That meant that while he was kissing me goodnight, while I was sketching plans for our wedding venue, while I was telling my grandmother that I had finally found a man who understood me, he had been giving himself to her. My hands clenched into fists, nails cutting into my skin, but the pain barely registered. She wasn't finished. "The best part," Claudia said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "The ring was always meant for me. His mother promised it years ago. He gave it to her just to feel rebellious, to play some silly game of independence. But blood wins. It always wins. She's just keeping it warm for me until it's back where it belongs." My vision blurred. Not from tears alone but from rage so sharp it distorted everything. I clutched at the stall door as if I might collapse. The ring on my finger, the ring I had cherished as a promise of forever, wasn't even mine in their eyes. I was a placeholder, a temporary figure in their grand narrative. I bit my lip until I tasted iron, willing myself not to make a sound. The stall door rattled when I pushed it open, but Claudia was already gone, her laughter floating down the corridor like smoke. I stared at myself in the mirror. My gown shimmered, my hair immaculate, but my eyes, they belonged to a woman betrayed, humiliated, reduced to a prop at her own celebration. For a moment I wanted to tear the dress off, rip the ring from my finger, and vanish into the night. But then another thought, clearer and sharper than my pain, rose inside me. He thinks he has written the ending. He believes I'll crumble quietly and leave without a fight. But he doesn't know me. He doesn't know the battles I've already fought, the sacrifices I've made to carve my way into a world that wasn't built for women like me, let alone black women like me. He doesn't understand that once I decide to fight back, I don't stop until I win. I wipe the tears from my face, leaving behind only the strength that anger can forge. My grandmother's words returned like a whisper. Never let anyone write you small, Selena. Your worth is yours to guard. And in that instant, humiliation hardened into resolve. If Ethan thought tonight would end with me broken, then tonight would be the beginning of his undoing instead. I left the powder room with my head held higher than it had been when I entered. The guests didn't know what I had overheard, but they saw the storm gathering in me. I moved through the crowd like a flame through dry wood, quiet, steady, inevitable. On the dance floor, Ethan and Claudia were still twirling to the soft strains of the band, locked in their little world, as if I didn't exist. Every laugh she gave, every look he returned, fed the fire in me. Some of the guests looked away, ashamed to be caught watching my humiliation, but most couldn't resist. People are always hungry for the spectacle of another woman's downfall. I gave them nothing. No tears. No broken smile. Just silence as I walked past the couples and toward the corridor that led to Ethan's private study. The house belonged to him on paper, but I knew its layout almost as well as he did. I had spent months overseeing renovations, hiring artisans, and restoring features that had been ignored for years. I had invoices, contracts, and proof of every penny I had invested in this place. My sweat and my money were in its walls. It wasn't his alone. He had underestimated me, seeing only the woman dazzled by diamonds and designer gowns, forgetting that behind all that was a mind trained to calculate, to design, to build. I closed the door to the study and picked up the phone. My hands were steady now, no tremor left. I dialed the one number I knew would answer without question. Ruth, my closest friend from law school. She had built her career around contracts and litigation, and though I had chosen architecture over the courtroom, I never let go of what I had learned. Ruth, I said, my voice calm but urgent. I need you at the estate tonight. Bring everything. I'll explain when you get here. She didn't ask why. She just said, give me an hour, and hung up. As I waited, I opened Ethan's desk drawers, not rifling in desperation but searching with precision. The man was meticulous, but arrogance breeds carelessness. Receipts, statements, legal documents, they were all there, stacked and sorted, because he never imagined anyone would have the courage to use them against him. My chest tightened with every paper I touched, not from fear but from clarity. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. He had tried to reduce me to decoration, but I was about to become the author of the story he thought he controlled. When Ruth arrived, her heels tapping the marble with urgency, she looked at me once and saw everything. Betrayal, pain, but also something more dangerous. Determination. She placed her briefcase on the desk and said, "Tell me everything." And I did every overheard word, every suspicious glance, every cruel revelation. Her face hardened with every detail. "Good," she finally said. "Then let's make him regret underestimating you." The ballroom echoed faintly beyond the study walls, the laughter and music a cruel reminder of the facade still holding in place. But inside that study, something new was being built. Not a mansion, not a marriage, but a plan. A plan for justice, for revenge, for reclaiming the dignity that had been stripped from me in front of 300 witnesses. And as Ruth spread out documents, her pen flying over contracts, her sharp eyes scanning for leverage, I knew one thing for certain. Tonight would not end with me broken. Tonight I would begin to rewrite everything. The study smelled of polished oak and expensive whiskey, but to me it had the air of a battlefield. Ruth sat across from me, her dark eyes sharp as she sorted through the stack of documents I'd pulled from Ethan's desk. My fingers traced the edge of the diamond ring he'd slipped on my hand just months before. It didn't feel like a symbol of love anymore. It felt like evidence, a piece of the case I was slowly stitching together. The music outside swelled, muffled by the thick walls, and I imagined them still dancing, Claudia's white dress glowing beneath the chandeliers while Ethan smiled as though the entire world belonged to him. But that illusion was crumbling, and he didn't even know it yet. "You've put money into this estate," Ruth murmured, tapping her pen against a receipt. "Renovations, interior design, even the landscaping. All from your accounts." "I have every transfer documented," I said. My voice was steady now, stripped of the tremor humiliation had once placed there. She looked up, a slow smile forming. Then he has a problem. In the event of a broken engagement due to infidelity, you're not walking away empty-handed. The law's on your side, Selena. Her words filled me with a new kind of strength, heavier than anger but steadier than despair. For so long I had thought of myself as part of Ethan's orbit, dazzled by his gravity. But in that moment I realized I wasn't circling him at all. I had been building my own foundation beneath his without him ever noticing. Every pound I had invested in his properties, every hour I'd spent making his house into a home, every sacrifice I had made in good faith, all of it had created leverage he hadn't considered. What about the ring? I asked, lifting my hand. The diamond glimmered coldly under the lamplight. If he's been unfaithful, the ring is legally yours to keep, Ruth replied without hesitation. Engagement rings are conditional gifts in the eyes of the court. Break the condition, and the injured party keeps it. And you, Selena, are very much the injured party. I thought back to Claudia's smug voice in the hallway, boasting about how the ring had always been hers, how I was only keeping it warm. The memory burned, but Ruth's words doused the sting with justice. That ring wasn't a loan, wasn't a placeholder. It was mine now, legally, rightfully, permanently. Not because Ethan had given it with sincerity, but because his betrayal had forfeited any claim he thought he still held. Ruth leaned forward, lowering her voice. He's careless. He believes his money and power make him untouchable. But those very things give us the sharpest weapons. We can turn this night into something he'll never recover from. I nodded slowly, feeling resolve lock into place like the final piece of a puzzle. For hours we combed through papers, highlighting investments, cross-checking signatures, pulling threads he had left dangling in arrogance. By the time the clock struck midnight, my humiliation had hardened into strategy. I was no longer the woman whispered about in the ballroom. I was the woman with proof, a lawyer at her side, and a plan sharp enough to slice through his empire. The muffled music outside softened into another romantic melody. I didn't have to look to know who was dancing to it. I imagined Ethan's hand pressed against Claudia's back, his lips bent toward her ear, their little cocoon of intimacy glowing under the lights while 300 guests watched and whispered. The image didn't wound me anymore, it fueled me. Every smile they shared, every tender glance, was another brick in the wall I was going to pull down on top of them. Ruth closed the last folder and snapped her briefcase shut. You have everything you need, she said firmly. Now the choice is yours. Do you want to leave quietly? Or do you want to make sure every person out there sees him for who he really is? I thought of the guests, of their gasps and their whispers, of the pity in their eyes as I stood alone earlier. I thought of my grandmother, who had told me never to let anyone write me small. I thought of the years I had spent proving myself in a world that expected me to fail. And I knew I wouldn't leave quietly. I wouldn't slink away into the shadows while he rewrote the narrative to suit his convenience. No, I would reclaim the story with my own hands, and I would do it in front of every witness who had seen me humiliated. I'm not leaving, I said, rising to my feet. My reflection in the study window was different now. The same gown, the same jewels, but a woman with fire in her eyes instead of tears. I'm going to end this on my terms. Ruth gave a satisfied nod. Then go give them a show they'll never forget. I opened the door to the corridor, and the music poured back in, thick and heavy with sentiment. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked toward the ballroom. Every step measured, every breath steady. Guests turned as I entered, their eyes flickering with curiosity. Some still wore pity, others wore intrigue, but none of them knew what was coming. At the center of the room, under the golden lights, Ethan and Claudia moved together, as though they had been rehearsing all their lives. Their bodies swayed, their smiles glowed, their whispers brushed like silk between them. To everyone else it might have looked like romance reborn. To me it looked like evidence of betrayal, arrogance, and disrespect. I moved toward the band, my gown catching the light with every stride. The pianist's hand stilled when he saw me approach, the violinist's bow trembling slightly in the pause. I reached for the microphone resting on its stand. My fingers curled around it, cool and steady, and I lifted it with a calm I didn't feel but knew I had to project. The room hushed instantly. Conversations stilled. Glasses froze midair. Even the chandelier seemed to lean closer, waiting. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice ringing clear through the hall. Every head turned. Ethan and Claudia stopped mid-step, his hand still on her back, her smile faltering as she realized all eyes were no longer admiring but watching. "I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. This was meant to be a celebration of love and partnership. And in a way it still is, just not the way any of you expected." The silence that followed was electric. My heart pounded, but I didn't waver. I looked directly at Ethan, whose smile had frozen into something brittle, and then at Claudia, whose face drained of its smug confidence. For the first time that evening it was they who stood exposed, not me. "Tonight you've had the chance to see my fiancé's true character," I continued. "You've watched him honor another woman while publicly humiliating the one he promised to marry. You've witnessed deception dressed up as devotion. But that's not the most shocking part." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan stepped forward, panic flashing in his eyes, but I raised a hand to silence him. My voice had the room now, and I wasn't about to relinquish it. I slipped my phone from the fold of my gown and held it up. "I overheard a conversation earlier," I said evenly. "A conversation where Claudia spoke about how this engagement would end tonight, how she is carrying Ethan's child, and how the ring on my finger was never meant for me at all. I recorded every word. Would you like to hear it?" Gasps broke like waves across the room. Ethan's face paled. Claudia's hand flew to her mouth, and whispers surged in every corner. I stood tall, the microphone steady in my grip. For the first time all evening, the humiliation wasn't mine. It was theirs. And I wasn't done yet. The gasp that swept across the ballroom was unlike anything I had ever heard. It wasn't just shock, it was the sound of reputations collapsing, alliances breaking, and masks slipping all at once. 300 people, powerful people, frozen in their tuxedos and gowns, waiting to see what would happen next. My hand tightened around the microphone. I could feel the weight of the ring pressing into my finger, a reminder of everything that had been stolen from me in silence, and everything I was about to take back with a voice that refused to tremble. Ethan's lips parted, his polished composure cracking in real time. "Selena, let's not do this here, he began. His voice a strained whisper that failed to mask his panic. "Oh, but here is exactly where this belongs." I cut in, my tone sharp enough to silence him. "Because this wasn't just between us, Ethan. You humiliated me in front of everyone, and so now you will be exposed in front of everyone. Fair, isn't it?" The crowd shifted, a wave of whispers rising, the kind of whispers that destroy careers, marriages, fortunes. Claudia's face was pale, her lips quivering though she tried to keep her chin high. She looked like a woman who had always believed she was untouchable, and was now realizing she wasn't. I let the silence stretch a moment longer before speaking again, making sure every guest felt the gravity of what I was about to say. "For months," I continued, my voice ringing clear, "while I was planning a future with this man, while I sold my apartment and poured my money into building a home with him, while I left behind pieces of my career because I believed we were a team, he was sneaking around with her. And not only sneaking around, he was planning to throw me away like I was disposable. Planning to take back this ring. Planning to replace me with the woman you see before you now." I paused, then lifted my phone slightly. "But I don't need you to take my word for it. I have proof. Proof of what Claudia said tonight about being pregnant. Proof of her smug little boast that this ring was never mine to begin with. Proof of everything he hoped to hide. And believe me when I say, if I press play right now, none of you will ever look at him the same again." The silence was deafening. The only sound was the faint crackle of the speakers and the pounding of my own heartbeat. Ethan's father, seated near the front, buried his face in his hands. His mother looked at Claudia with such pure disgust that even I felt the sting of it. Investors exchanged glances, already calculating losses. And Ethan, his confident jaw clenched, his perfect posture sagged, his billion-dollar composure finally stripped away. "You think this is a joke?" he hissed, stepping closer, though his voice trembled. I smiled, calm and cold. "The only joke here, Ethan, is how little you understood me. You thought I was just a pretty face, someone dazzled by your wealth, someone who would slink away in shame when the truth came out. You forgot that I built something long before you ever stepped into my life. You forgot that I am not weak, not naive, and certainly not disposable." I turned to the guests, letting my gaze sweep the room. What he didn't count on was that I've been keeping records. Every transfer of my money into his renovations. Every joint purchase with my name on the deed. Every contract tying my work to his empire. He thought he was the only one holding the power. He was wrong. Ruth appeared at the edge of the crowd then, briefcase in hand, her eyes glinting with approval as though she were watching a student ace an exam she'd been preparing for all her life. She handed me a stack of papers, which I held high for the room to see. "These are legal documents," I said, my voice steady, the authority in it unmistakable. "Proof that I own half of this mansion. Proof that I have claim to properties he never thought twice about because he assumed my loyalty made me blind. And tonight, in front of all of you, his investors, his colleagues, his so-called friends, I am giving him a choice. He can sign these papers now, transferring full ownership of this estate to me and compensating me for every investment I've made. Or I will make sure every word of my recording, every document in this file, and every photograph of him tonight with his mistress finds its way into court and into the press. His reputation, his business, his empire, it will all crumble. And I promise you I won't stop until it does." The guests erupted in hushed voices, some gasping, others muttering in disbelief. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it was almost visible in the air. Ethan no longer looked like the untouchable billionaire, but like a man cornered, stripped of his armor, his secrets turned into chains. He looked around the room desperately, perhaps searching for someone to defend him, but no one met his eyes. Not his business partners, not his family, not even Claudia, who now seemed more frightened than triumphant. "You can't be serious," he muttered, though the defeat in his voice betrayed him. "Try me," I said softly, dangerously. "But remember, there are 300 witnesses in this room. Every single one of them saw how you treated me tonight. Every single one of them knows the truth now. So, Ethan, what's it going to be?" He hesitated, then finally nodded toward Ruth. "Give me the papers," he said hoarsely. His hand shook as he signed his name, each stroke of ink another thread unraveling from the empire he had built on arrogance. When he finished, I took the papers back and held them to my chest, a smile curving my lips for the first time that night. "Oh, and one more thing," I added, lifting my hand to show off the diamond ring. "This? It's mine now, legally. And I think I'll have it reset into a necklace, a reminder that I don't need anyone else to define my worth." The room broke into murmurs again, some gasps of admiration, others of shock. But what mattered most was the look on Ethan's face, pale, defeated, utterly ruined in front of everyone who had once revered him. Claudia slipped quietly from his side, her face burning with humiliation. The woman who had entered in white like a queen was leaving like a ghost. I lowered the microphone, my voice soft but cutting as I spoke one final time. "Thank you all for witnessing this. I hope you remember that betrayal has consequences, and that you should never underestimate a woman who knows her worth." With that, I turned and walked out, my heels striking the marble like drums of victory. The night air was cool against my skin, the sky wide and endless above me. I climbed into the sleek black car waiting outside, my head held high, the papers safe in my hands, the ring glinting with new meaning. 6 months later, I was no longer the woman defined by Ethan's wealth or shadow. I had turned the mansion into my headquarters, expanded my architectural firm into one of the most sought after in Europe, and surrounded myself with people who valued me for more than appearances. Ethan's reputation had never recovered. His investors abandoned him, deals collapsed, and his name became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Claudia had her child, but Ethan was no longer the man she thought she'd tethered herself to. She was left fighting for scraps of his dwindling fortune. And me? I woke each morning with sunlight spilling across my own bed in my own home, stronger, freer, and more powerful than I had ever been. Because the lesson I carried wasn't just about revenge, though that part was sweet. It was about self-worth, about never letting anyone diminish me, about fighting for my dignity even when my heart was breaking. And if my story teaches anyone anything, let it be this. Love without respect is a cage, and the moment you recognize it, you have the power to break free. If this story made your heart race, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because I promise, there are more twists and truths coming your way. But tell me this in the comments. If you discovered your fiancé was secretly planning to replace you with his ex, would you walk away quietly? Or would you fight back and make them regret underestimating you? I can't wait to read your answers.